All right, good afternoon, everyone. If you are here, that probably means you did not win the winning Powerball lottery ticket last night, unfortunately, but we are happy that you are present. This is a tri-joint committee session of our Planning, Housing and Parks, Health and Human Services, and Economic Development committees. And we will be discussing two items today. First, Bill 2223, Transient Lodging Facility, Short-Term Residential Rental, and ZTA 2304, Residential Uses, Short-Term Residential Rental. And of course, the two are inextricably linked. For context, this was introduced by our council president at the request of the county executive. And as you see by how many agencies are involved in this issue, it is complex and multi-layered. And so we are not going to be voting today. This is a work session to be able to provide some context. I'm speaking for myself here. I have a lot of questions and need to be able to process all of this. And this goes back all the way to the previous council and the initial bill that was introduced to address the Airbnb issue, which remains a challenge in every jurisdiction across this country, and one that local jurisdictions are trying to reasonably balance and work through and be thoughtful about, recognizing all of the myriad of policy challenges, but also enforcement challenges that laws such as this establish and create. So I want to thank big time Ms. Nadeau, because it seems like once again you drew the short straw here, Ms. Nadeau, and did a fantastic job of processing and working through a complex series of information. And so the way I'd like to structure today's session, if colleagues agree, is pretty straightforward. I'll obviously give my co-chairs the opportunity to say some opening comments. Then I'll turn it over to Ms. Nadeau to frame this at a high level. And then what I'd like to do, especially since this was done at the request of the executive branch, is to request that executive branch representatives come forward and, for context, present why they felt this particular legislation was necessary. And then, of course, the planning board has also weighed in and provided some important information. And then I'd like to yield to them for them to be able to provide information from their perspective. And then we'll go through the packet at that point, and we'll see how far we get today. And then we'll see where that takes us. So with that, I'd like to yield to my two co-chairs. I'd like to start with Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez and see if she'd like to say some opening comments.
I'm going to keep it short and sweet. Thank you so much for being here today, and I look forward to the work session and voting on those bills.
Thank you so much. And Chair Friedson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you to both and everybody. Thank you to the executive branch for your work here. My only suggestion as we go through this and think through it, if we're not voting today, is these are related issues, but I do think there are some differences between what the intention is in the bill and what some of the objectives are of the zoning text amendment. And so I think we should really hear from council staff and from the executive branch of what is related and what is separate issues. And I do think that there may be an opportunity for us to move forward with some of the interest here, and even if there are lingering questions about others. So I just want to kind of set that expectations. I would just ask, as we're hearing from council staff and if we're hearing from the executive branch, that that really be centered in the conversation to explain what is in the bill, what is the interest, what is the urgency, what is in the zoning text amendment, and whether those can be separated, and if they can't be, why not. So I'll yield back to you, and I appreciate your taking this on, and thank you again to Ms. Nadeau. I agree that she tends to get the toughest assignments, and this is certainly a complicated one. So I'll yield back.
Thank you so much. So Ms. Nadeau, I'll turn it over to you. If you can help frame this from 30,000 feet, just provide from your perspective and your analysis some context and background, and then I'll invite our colleagues from the executive branch forward to say some comments as well.
Sounds great. Thank you. So I guess what I'll do is I'll start with the history. So we as in the county, I actually wasn't here yet, originally looked at short-term residential rentals back in 2016. And after introduction and public hearing, a lot of issues came up, some of which are brought up again in today's packet. And at that time, council asked the planning department to go and do some public outreach. So there were 3 more public hearings. Planning did a lot of research and then came back with, here are our proposals. So a new bill and ZTA were introduced. Council worked through those, and that's how we came up with the current legislation. To make things a bit easier, I know legislation can be kind of hard to read, a lot of underlining in brackets. So one thing that happened in this bill is a lot of stuff is just rearranged. So you'll see something that's underlined, but not necessarily something that's new. And so on page 4 of the packet, that was the intent of the table, is to show what's currently in the law and then what the proposed changes. So the intent from the CE side, who I will defer to, of course, is that there's been some issues with enforcement. Right now, this is under DHHS. It's basically 1 or 2 people who work on this, and, we get complaints in, there's inspections, trying to verify. There's also a bit of who should be enforcing things. DPS will get a call because there's a zoning issue and then transfers it to HHS. Sometimes the police are called. So just working through that enforcement. Some big numbers you'll see in here is right now we know there's probably 1,200 of these rentals operating and only about 150 are licensed, which also makes enforcement difficult. So the intent here is to figure out how to fix the enforcement issues, but also make sure that, we agreed in 2016 and 2017 that we're going to allow short-term residential rentals. So let people benefit from this service, be able to rent out their property, but in a way that doesn't harm their neighboring communities.
Thank you. And I should have mentioned just logistically, colleagues, we're going old school. Just raise your hand if you'd like to be called, and I'll put you in the queue because I haven't worked this system yet. I will get it down at some point. Thank you very much, Ms. Nadeau.
One last thing,
yes.
Ken Hartman is here from the CE's office. I did not put his name on the packet, and I do apologize to him for that. So, and I assume that's who you'd like to speak on the bill.
Absolutely. I would like, that's a perfect transition, to invite our colleagues from the executive branch forward, whoever is designated to speak on this issue. And if everybody could introduce themselves once you're seated.
Thank you so much, Chair Albanaz. For the record, my name is Ken Hartman Espada. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships in the Office of the County Executive. And I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about this piece of legislation. With me, there are folks from DHCA and HHS who can introduce themselves, and we can talk a little bit about the bill and answer your questions. I'm turning it over to Scott, Director Bruton.
Just introductions.
Thank you very much. Scott Bruton, Department of Housing and Community Affairs Director. I'll turn it over to Nathan Bovell.
Good afternoon, Chair and Council members. My name is Nathan Bovell. I'm the Chief of Community Development for the Department of Housing and Community Affairs.
Good afternoon. I'm Porfin Salem, Division Chief of Finance and Administration of the ECA.
Good afternoon. I'm Tiffany Johnson, Program Manager of Licensing and Registration with DHCA.
Good afternoon. Tamala Robinson, Code Enforcement. I'm the Manager of the Code Enforcement Section.
And good afternoon, Kenneth Welch, Montgomery County Health Department, Public Health Services, Licensure and Regulatory.
Terrific. Thank you.
So as for some opening remarks, we started this path towards drafting legislation over a year ago after a number of complaints had been piling up that were frankly unresolved. And they were unresolved for a variety of factors. As you know, with code enforcement, it's very difficult to get problems fixed if you don't have the cooperation of the owner and you have to go to court. Also, there's the challenge of when things happen and then when inspectors show up in the field. As you know, with rentals, short-term rentals are those rentals 30 days or less. If you're 30 days or greater, you ought to be getting a rental license and using a lease for your housing. So let's separate that part of the market out, 30 days or greater, because that's beyond the original bill or this bill. The complaints we had been receiving were short-term rentals that were then in turn used for large gatherings, sometimes dozens, 100 people or more at a house for a party, and it became very, very difficult for us to achieve compliance with owners when this had happened. We were looking to simplify the process for addressing issues and also for reviewing licenses and applications. simplification, meaning that someone shows up at the door, it's a short-term rental, it's easy to count based on the occupancy. Occupancy in the bill, we're asking for no more than 6 people. The previous legislation is no more than 2 per bedroom. Either way, you know the number of bedrooms, like we do in rental housing. You can easily go through the house and figure out how many people are supposed to be there. The other part about requiring owners to be on the application, that's a simple matter, because for these properties, you're not supposed to rent them out for more than 120 days a year. So that owner ought to be the primary resident of the property. And we, instead of looking at complicated ways of determining whether someone has the authority to act on the owner's behalf, we simplified it to be the owner as that person on STAT, so that a reviewer of an application can simply go through the name without having to review a lease or having to review other power of attorney documents. That was the reason behind that change. We also wanted to make sure that we were capturing life safety issues, requiring the carbon monoxide detectors, the smoke detectors, addressing overcrowding, because at the end of the day, short-term rentals are still housing. People have to sleep there, and they should be sleeping safely, not in basement bedrooms or in interior units or in rooms of the house that were never intended for people to sleep in. Some of the other things we wanted to address, with enforcement, we wanted to make sure we put in an administrative process for reviewing applications to simplify and make it easier for us to quickly address problem properties. We wanted to make sure that neighbors at the point of application were given adequate time to receive a notification and to be able to address whatever appeals they have. I think right now there was a 30-day challenge period, and the thought was neighbors did not have time to get to say the Board of Appeals in an appropriate amount of time. Other issues we'll go through as we talk through the packet. I really appreciate working with Livu Nadu in the preparation for this meeting. Kenny Welsh at the end of the table with HHS. He's the one at this table most intimately familiar with what's happening today, with the shortcomings in inspection, the challenges that his office is facing. The folks from DHCA will, under this bill, the responsibility transfers to them. We see that as lining up with their mission for housing. As I said, under 30 days, over 30 days, they already have the responsibility for licensing and regulating that housing. Under 30 days would then pass to them under legislation. Look forward to answering any questions you have as we go through the packet.
Thank you. Mr. Welsh, if you wanted to just provide some on-site anecdotal or otherwise information just to help frame this conversation for us, to give us a sense of what it is we're dealing with. That was helpful from a high level, but any more specificity would be great.
Sure. I think the biggest issue that we've had is basically with enforcement personnel, having individuals to be able to not only look at and approve the applications, because that is time consuming, but also the enforcement in the field, especially when we have these large gatherings, parties, if you will. All of our staff are, under the union contract. We don't have anybody available. It's all volunteer. So to get somebody out there at the time, 9 on up to midnight, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, it's just not feasible. We relied a lot on police. There's been some issue with getting their documentation back to us. Sometimes it hasn't been documented. They might respond and they don't think it's an incident worth reporting. Therefore, it's like it never occurred. So I think the big picture here is the fact that moving forward, whoever has this program needs to have some people who are capable of enforcing it and possibly being able to react late at night to certain circumstances that arise.
I appreciate that's helpful. And then, Mr. Burton, I know you're in a probably slightly better position, but not a perfect position to be able to absorb this. I'm not sure that any agency is. From your perception on the outset, what opening comments would you like to provide?
Thank you for the opportunity. The county executive, in putting forward this bill, and the ZTA has asked for us to take over this responsibility, and at his request, we are happy to do so if the council so approves. In the fiscal impact statement that we provided, in conversations with HHS, we did our best to learn what the challenges and responsibilities for enforcing the existing law and for the changes would be, and we put forward the staffing and startup needs that we would need to do that responsibly based on the bill as written. And we're also happy today to comment on if there are any questions about changing the bill as written, if that would have any further staffing and administrative implications. And the four folks from DHCA who are with me today, they are here because they are the folks who would be actually doing the enforcement administration under these changes, and so figured best to bring the experts along to talk.
Thank you. And obviously, law enforcement, I know, is here because of, you know, the residual impact that they've had to deal with, because oftentimes these calls come in after hours. We may not have staff on duty. We might have somebody on call but can't physically go out. And who's a neighbor going to call? They're going to call 911 if things are being especially disruptive. So we understand why MCPD is here, and Lord knows they're already stretched, and so this is yet another issue that they're having to deal with on top of everything else. I had two more context questions, and then see if any of my other colleagues have context questions for this panel before we invite planning board staff to come forward and then go back into the packet. But the 1,200 number, that I assume was just done through an internet search of Airbnb and other similar types of rental services?
So thank you for your question. DHHS actually has a what we call a short-term rental portal that we pay for annually. And what that portal does is it identifies all the short-term rentals within the county. It's also a licensing platform, as well as you can send letters through it. They will send it out for you for individuals who are not licensed or operating illegally, such as an ADU. So it's an entire platform for just short-term rentals. That number, it fluctuates from day to day. Today's numbers were 1,450 in the county, and we have 178 of those licensed.
And are they geographically spread out throughout the county, or are they concentrated in certain zip codes?
They are spread out throughout the county, but you'll see a lot more in certain areas of the county, more so than other areas.
Gotcha. And single-family homes mostly?
Majority.
Okay. Chair Friedson.
Thank you. So I just want to, that was one of my context questions, but I want to follow up on that. I just want to make sure I understand. So in order to be in your database, that is, something has been filed, a complaint has been filed, a license application has been filed, but something has been filed?
So this database, basically, it scours the internet for rentals, basically Airbnb, VRBO, all the social platforms.
So it is what he was suggesting, is it's more than a basic search, but a search of the internet to see Vrbo and Airbnb and any other short-term rental that's advertised, in addition to a formal license application and or a complaint for a particular property.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So there's 1,450 of those, 178. How many of those do you inspect? Those, you know, there's 178, 1,450 in your database. How many of the 1,450 in the database that aren't one of the 178 do you inspect?
Zero.
Zero. Okay. So there's no enforcement that's happening.
None. It's all complaint driven.
Okay. So, okay. So the two things that we've heard, obviously the main impetus for this, and just to give context, the prior Fed committee addressed some of these issues 3.5 years ago. And there was a discussion at that point and a suggestion of looking at whether or not it made sense to move the department. If enforcement was an issue, and Councilmember Jawando is nodding because we both were in that. It was on the 7th floor upstairs. I know we both remember that conversation vividly, and this is part of that. There have been a lot of other things that have been added on to that suggestion here that I think we need to think through, but this is a core part of it. The other context here is I'm just trying to understand is your fiscal analysis based on what they're currently doing, or it's based on what you think needs to be done for the county executive to believe that enforcement is happening?
It's
because I understand why it costs $0 to do nothing.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to understand is how much would it cost to do something?
Yes, it is based on the bill and ZTA as written for us to administer those changes and to administer them effectively. Yes.
Okay, so in order to change responsibility of doing almost nothing from one department to another, that administrative change doesn't cost anything. But if you were actually going to do the work that's not being done, that would be a very expensive enterprise that's not included here.
Correct.
Okay, so I just think we need to set expectations. This is not a free thing. If we want to do enforcement, we're going to have to pay for it. And we need to have a conversation about that. That might be an additional conversation subsequent to this bill. But regardless of what we do, we are not providing resources, personnel to actually enforce this. And the biggest complaint that I hear is that enforcement is non-existent, which has been confirmed. It's confirmed 3.5 years ago. It's been confirmed again now. We do not enforce this, which is not acceptable. I don't think any of us believe that it's acceptable. But this bill may be the start of what is intended by the executive branch to begin the type of enforcement that it sounds like we would like to see, but this bill really doesn't do that. Money would do that. Staff resources would do that, right? I mean, so I'm understanding that correctly.
The bill would enable us if we have the resources, yes.
Sure, but I mean, HHS, if they had the resources, could do it too. I happen to think that if you're doing more than 30 days, doing less than 30 days, having that in the same department, having people who do housing makes sense. But it's not really in order to do enforcement. That problem would be solved by resources, not by where in county government this is located. Because the reality is, they call the police, they call permitting. We have DPS is here as well. They call our offices, complaining quite a bit. So I just want to be honest about what needs to happen in order to actually move us in the right direction here.
And Council Vice President Friesen, you're exactly right. Resources are a big part of this, and it's, as we dug deeper, the enforcement mechanism for short-term rentals was never in place from the start, and it's something to keep in mind. But we do need to find an appropriate home for it. We do believe that even whatever the resource level is, the administrative process will make it easier to quickly address issues, but it's not going to solve the issues with getting an inspector in the field, whichever department it's at.
Sure. And then last question on this related context. The big issue here is that we're not doing any enforcement because we haven't paid to do any enforcement, number one. Number two is 9 p.m. to midnight. We heard that. No matter how much resources we put into that, most departments do not have people who are working 24 hours a day besides the police. So the question is, if we move it to DHCA, if one of the main issues of complaints, it sounds like, are unmitigated parties or other types of activities that need to be reined in that happen late at night when people are trying to go to sleep, when kids are being put to bed, et cetera. How would the change to DHCA? Do you have staff that works 9 p.m. to midnight?
We currently do not have staff that work after hours, 9 p.m. to midnight, weekends or holidays. All of that is governed by our collective bargaining agreement. So in order to initiate that type of activity, there would have to be some negotiations with the union. We have had some preliminary discussions, understanding, of course, how understaffed the police department is, but trying to figure out ways that maybe we can coordinate efforts more effectively between either HHS or DHCA with the police, so that we can be informed of when infractions take place, so that those infractions could actually be recorded, would count as violations that we could issue citations for, and then possibly revoke licenses.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Chair Albornoz said. Police are stretched
No,
way too thin already. So the idea that we're relying on police to do what really isn't police work, it's really agency work that's happening after hours, is just entirely inappropriate.
Yeah,
so we need to figure out, it's not your fault, but the system is set up poorly that has set us up to act poorly, and we need to fix the system. So I'll just say, as we get into the context, before we start changing the rules and the, what is allowed and isn't allowed, we're not enforcing anything. So my interest would be to figure out how we get enforcement right, and then come back and figure everything else out once we can prove that we actually can enforce it. Because I am concerned that we're going to set unrealistic expectations in the community, as we already have for years and years, that we're going to set rules that we couldn't possibly enforce, that we're literally not enforcing right now. So I'm willing to try DHCA. It sounds like I'd like to hear more about how it would work, but I think we need to focus on how to get enforcement right and what is needed to do that. What do we need to do in a bill to start? What appropriations and collective bargaining, initiations by the executive branch need to happen, and then if there are things that need to be changed once we've actually proven that we can enforce the rules that we have, it's reasonable for me to look at changing the rules for what makes sense. I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just a couple of notes. So there's no perfect way to have this conversation because it is complex. So this is perfect. It's possible that within your context question, colleagues, you may bleed into something that's already in the packet. That's okay, because there's no perfect way to have this conversation. So I've got Councilmember Jawando, followed by Councilmember Balcom, then Councilmember Lutke, and then Council President Glass. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I do remember that conversation on the 7th floor, and I remember us talking about the bill then and what might need to happen. I do think moving to DHCA makes more sense. I said so at the time, and so that part I think makes sense. I do also think that we need to get a better handle on what we're doing under the current law, right? Like the current law has the 3 strikes and you're out policy, for example. But it sounds like from what I've heard today, let me just ask, has that ever been utilized?
So I'm going to defer to Kenny Welsh and keep him, and he can describe what needs to be done to achieve that compliance, and that involves citations and going to court, and I'll leave it to him.
Yeah, so the 3 strikes and you're out, that's an excellent question. 3 strikes and you're out has to be within a year's time. There's no way you can get 3 strikes in the court and get a conviction within a year's time. So we've had, for instance, we've been dealing with a property that we've issued 6 citations within the past year, and we still haven't gotten it into court for a hearing. So the reason for the enforcement in this, there needs to be something there extending that out from 1 year to 3 years so that it can spread out evenly. So when you do issue those citations, you do have ample time to get it into court to get a conviction. The second part about that is that there has to be a challenge. There's no way right now to really revoke a license. So there has to be a challenge on the renewal by a neighbor in order, and then you have to follow through that process, which we're currently doing with one of the properties. They have to have time to respond to that challenge, and then it's up to the director to decide whether or not to deny the renewal application.
Right.
So that's the point right
and the
now.
renewals
that
are
we're
every, what's the time
it's,
period?
It's an annual.
It's every year. Right?
Yeah, that's correct. So you're in that short window there where you have three citations. You have to get into court and get a conviction within that renewal period, basically to deny the license.
So are there other And the bill, if I read it correctly, eliminates that regime, and you could be revoked after one complaint under the legislation. What's the reasoning for that?
Basically, the property that we're currently dealing with, when you have 100, 200 people at a house, you're blocking a road. You have people double parked on a major road to try to.
So just that's
Yeah.
egregious. We don't want that happening.
Correct.
I think we all agree. I also think it's an exception, not the rule. So the policy changes proposed based on one property that you're having an issue with.
That's not the intent of changing the policy. The policy is for those problematic properties.
Okay. Well, I'll just say I think we need to figure out a way that it sounds like now you have very little ability to deal with it. This kind of swings it in the other direction where there's, I think, maybe a little less due process than I'm comfortable with after one complaint. So I think that's just something I wanted to state up. I agree with Councilmember Friedson. We need to figure out, before we change and add more rules, we need to figure out how we give you resources and how you have even staff to inspect before we add new rules. I just think that's the cart before the horse here, in my view. So that I just want to state that up front. I agree with that sentiment. And I think, the conversation we just had is an example of that. Like, let's figure out how to enforce the current set of rules. And if we need to make some tweaks so that they can actually work, that's fine. But the idea that we're not in the position where we're saying, oh, well, the rules we had aren't stringent enough because they weren't working. No, we weren't doing anything. So I just think we want to, before we swing the pendulum too far, we want to make sure you have the resources. There's staff that can go out and inspect that are appropriate, and those bargained agreements are in place. That's how I personally feel before we would make wholesale changes to the law. So that's just for context, and I'll yield for now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You. I've got Councilmember Balcom up next.
I'm really just reiterating my original thought, and excuse me, I've all of a sudden got a froggy voice for the first time today. My apologies. Thank you. As we go through the specifics, I think it's important to look at the existing law and say, if we had enforcement, would the existing law be adequate before we change as we go through each of those? But from the perspective of the troubled properties, I agree. I think we all agree we don't want those kinds of things. But the existing law prohibits that kind of event happening. So I'm not sure if changing the law would eliminate those raging parties. So as we go through that, I think we should consider, is this an enforcement issue or a necessary change in the law? So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lutke, followed by Council President Glass, and then Councilmember Funny Gonzalez.
Thank you. Yeah, I haven't finished a full year here yet, but the prior existing law has been on the books for 7 years, right? And we've been talking about enforcement, and what I heard was that we haven't been able to do the enforcement effectively. But what wasn't answered is, over those 7 years, what funding was allocated for this work to have happened, right? Because in looking at this new provision and new proposed switching from DHHS over to DHCA, I note that one of the questions, and thank you, Director Bruton, for answering my question about whether there would be efficiencies that could be done with with our rent stabilization enforcement and regulation. Would they be able to do that? And the answer that I got was that they might possibly have an administrative overlap between two IT specialist roles, and that's it. But my concern is there are people for whom this was tasked to within an agency, and it may be that there are bumpy reasons why it hasn't played out. Those are not necessarily legislative issues. Those are operational issues. And if we tag on or add on a different legislative issue and switch departments, are we still stuck with the same problem but with more requirements that we also can't manage? Because the numbers that were given about the number of Airbnb or VRBOs in the county versus the number that are registered, only 12% are registered to begin with. And one of the other things I have a concern about is how much, if you're registered, what revenue is generated to the county for your registration requirement versus what's the total cost for the enforcement? Because if we're only registering 12% of the entities, there's no consequence for not being registered currently, or it's not able to be enforced. Then we're not yielding any benefit. We're perhaps costing more. And we have existing laws on the books like our noise ordinances, which also are challenging to enforce, right? Because you can't get somebody out to go listen to what's going on. And it does fall on law enforcement to go out there. We don't have enough law enforcement to send out for these things. There may be other attendant issues that might ratchet that call up in a certain way, meaning neighbors are visualizing somebody driving out of the neighborhood drunk, right? So there's a heightened concern above the nuisance factor. But I haven't heard anything here that addresses that issue. And I don't know if anybody here can speak to that, but really if we're diving into, do we change things, do we not change things, and what are those changes and what should they be, we kind of need to know.
Councilmember Lukey, I'll take a stab at that. I, as being a member of the Leggett administration who worked on the original Airbnb legislation, which at the time jurisdictions around the country were looking at, here's this thing that's not regulated, there's no revenue coming off of them to support regulation.
Right.
How do we create a structure that generates the revenue that, and we did, the Leggett administration did propose this legislation,
Right.
but did not provide the corresponding resources in the department. And there was a long discussion in the staff packet back then. Back then, staff analyst Jeff Zions pointed out that he felt it belonged more in DHCA than HHS. But that's the way things have been since that time. In the exec's office, as we started hearing the complaints that you were hearing, we started asking those questions. Why is this not working? How is this? What are the problems in enforcement? What slows down the administration? And so the things you see in this bill about simplifying how you determine who has the authority to take out a license, that's one. Creating the administrative process that lets us address issues more quickly because the court cycle takes a long time. And that's not just this area, that's all across code enforcement. And that's why that provision's in the law. And there are other things in here like capacity. How can someone who shows up know who's supposed to be there and who's not? As capacity, and there was requiring the registry that the owner or agent can provide on the spot if there's a problem. Those are all geared towards making this easier to enforce.
Maybe Ms. Nadeau, I may just be missing this, or I may not have. There's a lot in here. Zoning law is not my forte, but thank you for everything that you do. What's the penalty for not being registered and operating currently?
So currently it is a Class A violation, so it's $500 for the initial offense, and one of the proposals in here is increasing it. But that is the penalty, and I believe it was during the public hearing, the county executive noted, it's tough with penalties because for $500 you could make that back renting out in one night. So, but that is the current penalty under the law, and that's based on the section of the code that talks about penalties. That's just the standard penalty for Class A.
Okay, so if 88% of the properties are operating this right now without a license, without being registered with the county, that's a lot of money you all could collect and help with your enforcement efforts, don't you think? Right? Well, it's a start, right? Because if you're saying, if they have no incentive, right now, I'm not seeing a stick. They have a carrot, which is to say, I can go about doing this because there's really nobody's enforcing this piece of having the business registered in the first place. So you're right, $500, I can make that up in one night of operations, and there's no consequence of, and you're never going to be able to do this if you don't. If you either follow the rules, if you're not following the rules, you cannot do this. Like, there's nothing in there. So, like, you're right, it's as a matter of economics, it's very smart to just not register and just keep on keeping on because there hasn't been a consequence. And the other piece I was going to ask was, and there was just some recent article, like within the past week in the Atlantic, talking about individuals who rent apartments. It was in Brooklyn. right? Where they rent apartments, they don't live in the apartments. They just rent the apartments and then rent them out as Airbnbs because they can make a lot of money. And that then is taking a rental unit off the market. And I noticed in the packet that was a concern before when this legislation was proposed about not wanting to make rental units come off the market that are being utilized by people who are simply making money by renting them out secondarily. What in here may address that issue and can prevent that from happening? Because we know our rental market is tight.
Well, two things. The first was the requiring an owner who resides at the location to be the one who applies. So you need someone who lives there, who's there most of the year. And then secondly, with this function being in DHCA, anything rented for more than 30 days already requires a rental license and use of the county lease. That is leased housing. So if you hear of an apartment building that may have units that are designated for short-term rental, we expect that those units are going to be coming through DHCA and properly licensed because they don't fit in this other box. And having that in one department that can then triage, well, because if you go on Airbnb today and look at Montgomery County, you will find people who are renting their houses out for 6 months. You heard testimony from individuals who say they rent out their units to nurses at NIH.
Right.
Those are all long-term leases that should, more than 30-day leases that should be coming through DHCA.
So is there an issue with enforcement of that as well on those longer-term rentals?
That is all tied up to what Mr. Welsh mentioned was that the need to get out there to the folks who are listed and bring them into compliance. And that we're not staffed for today. Fiscal Impact said, laid out this is what we need to get there. And as council members rightly pointed out, whoever is managing this needs to address that. And we feel that DHCA is the appropriate place to manage it.
Yeah, I totally get that aspect of this discussion. It's just I'm trying to wrap my head around the bigger problem and the longer running problem of this sort of, it's easier when you can catch the thing as it's starting. It's harder when you're catching up later because the industry always tweaks itself and maneuvers itself because government is slow on the regulatory aspects and then, takes a while to get enforcement done. So thank you.
Thank you. Council President Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for joining us. This is a hard conversation to navigate because we all have initial thoughts as we've teed up the conversation. I have a lot of questions as we dive deeper into the specifics of the proposed legislation. But since we're talking big picture and colleagues have teed up the conversation about intent, and I think that's really what we're trying to discern here. What is the intention of the legislation? What is not working that needs to be remedied? I appreciate Mr. Welch sharing that there might be one or two examples that have been shared with us, but it is a little wider than that. Am I paraphrasing correctly?
Yes, I would agree with you.
Thank you. So let me start with the property that has been shared with us in the east part of the county, and in the conveyance of that information, it was stated that this property is illuminating the gaps in our current short-term rental laws. So it is the example that we're using. Let me phrase it this way. I know that nothing was done. It's been conveyed to us that nothing was done with regard to regulating that property because the current law did not provide guidance as to whether MCPD, HHS, or DHCA could do anything. Is that correct? I'll look at you, Mr. Hartman, I guess. It was a jurisdictional issue.
So and Commander McBain is here from the police department, but late night calls for there's a loud party down the block is always going to be routed to the police department because it is a disturbance. how that interplays with the department is something we're working through on a variety of fronts, because as Councilmember Lutke pointed out, police are understaffed and our inspectors are understaffed, and figuring that out is something we need to address. But whatever disturbance happens that night then can turn into action the following day in the inspections office.
Right. And as I understood the situation, it was not a good situation. It was something no one would want in their neighborhood because it wasn't remedied. And I see Commander McBain, and thank you for patrolling the east part of that county. Where I'm left right now is a little speechless, because I know that property was listed by Airbnb. Had anyone contacted Airbnb?
So I'll turn to Kenny, because I know we had a recent interaction with them, and I believe we were able to head off an issue. Was it this property or the other property, where they were listing for a party, and we got to the owner and put a stop to it?
It was the other property that you're referring to. The complainant was basically in discussions with Airbnb the entire time, and Airbnb just basically said, unless you have something that could prove that we could delist it, we're not going to delist it.
Okay. Well, my office contacted Airbnb last week about this property. It's been taken off the website under investigation. And so I'm not sure if that could have been done sooner. I'm not sure if it took less than a council member to contact them with a community complaint. But I think it's really important because action has been taken, and it was taken without legislation. My office picked up the phone and made a complaint, and it was serious enough for Airbnb to delist pending further investigation. So we're talking about intent, so I put that down right there. The last thing I just want to raise that my colleagues have been raising is about fees and taxes. By my understanding, Airbnb, and I don't mean to promote or chide that particular website, but it is the example that we're using here, has provided about $1.5 million in remittance based on user fees. And so if it is the will of this body and the will of the executive branch to have more enforcement, there were funds available, and I expect there will be funds available. So let's just keep this all in mind as we steer through this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. That was helpful. Chair Fanny Gonzalez.
I'm just going to go straight to the point. I worked on this bill when I was on the planning board before it came to the council. And when I was on the planning board, I remember saying that the agency that should oversee this should be DHCA. When it came to the council, they did not listen. And they put it under the HHS. Frankly, this is an enforcement issue. Many of the new provisions that the executive is recommending, I strongly opposed, especially the one about, let me see, I'm just going to pick on one. Total number of overnight guests limited to 2 per person, and total number of guests must not exceed 6, regardless of age. I was in California the other day. I went to Lake Tahoe, fascinating place. And I was there with a family friend, and we were 3 adults, I kid you not, like 8 children. They slept in the dining room, in the living room, in the hallways. They were everywhere, and they had a blast. So you're telling me that if a family from California comes to Montgomery County using Airbnb, they won't be able to do this because you have a maximum of 6 people, regardless of age, in that unit. No way. This is an enforcement issue. The only thing that I'm ready to vote on today, because I came here ready to vote, is not to wait for a second session. and not receiving a warning, the only thing that I will be comfortable in doing is moving this to DHCA and I look forward to having the department during the budget season share with us how many folks do you need. And this is great timing with the rent stabilization bill too, and in the software we're acquiring to ensure that we're actually tracking all these properties and get money out of them so we can pay for enforcement. Bills and ZTA should not be based on one case, even if it was crazy. And as Council President Evan Glass, it all took a phone call to remove that property. So, I don't know if I need to make a motion here, but I do think we need to, and if people need more time today, obviously we should do that. But I think we should only move this to the HCA and at least wait one more year to see how it plays out once they get more funds to really put money on enforcement. And you know what? This county also has this history of passing laws without explaining people what they passed. This is just one out of so many examples of many laws that don't get implemented or enforced because people have no idea. And we don't do a good job communicating to folks. So that should be also part of this whole effort of ensuring folks know that it's not just about getting your property listed in Airbnb or any of the other platforms, but also getting a license from the county under the HCA. That was my piece. There you
So
go.
I have a suggestion. Well, first, there are several decision points before us, regardless of whether we do those today or 2 weeks from now when we're scheduled to have the follow-up session. One is the fundamental question of whether or not this should be shifted to DHCA, and I think sensing the will of the body, there's no issue with that, and that probably makes the most sense. And then there are the line item changes within the bill that amend the current law that we'll need to go through, and already, understandably, some of my colleagues have expressed reservation about at least some of those specifically. And then there's the ZTA. And so if you could help frame those bucket decisions that we have to make, Ms. Nadeau, and then I would love to hear from our planning board colleagues as well, because they've deliberated over this too, that would be helpful. So, but Ms. Nadeau.
Sure. So yes, the big one is moving the agencies all together. There are some, and I believe this is what Mr. Hartman was talking about in terms of streamlining and making enforcement more efficient. So for example, the change where you needed 3 complaints, the adjustment in the bill would be now the director has this discretion. So I would recommend, we could pull out some of them, but if there is a decision to move it to DHCA and there are things in the bill that could streamline the enforcement versus the items where they're already in there and we're already not enforcing them, so changing it won't help. But there are a couple that are more, I'd say the top 2 are giving the director more discretion on approval, renewal, suspending, revoking, all of that. And then the second big one would be the Board of Appeals timeline. So those 2, even if it moved in the current law, DHCA still wouldn't be able to do those things without that change. As for the ZTA, the only 2 things in the ZTA that are changing is the conversation about owners and owner-authorized agents, and then the number of guests. So those are the only 2 provisions that are in the ZTA. So if you're tabling, I should stop using the word table because I know that is a technical term in our rules. If we're holding off on the specific details until we make sure the move works, then probably it would make sense those 2 things in the ZTA wouldn't need to be addressed yet.
That's super helpful. I do want to uplift something that I believe Mr. Berbert said, which is that this is a bargaining issue. It's not just a resource issue. That is no small thing. As a former executive branch director that managed staff after hours, it's a significant issue. And so I will yield to my colleagues in the executive branch to see if they've had any initial conversations with our colleagues in labor to see if there's interest in having those conversations. And if you can also remind us the collective bargaining cycle of when the next opportunity we would have to have this be reflected in the newly negotiated contracts.
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on the cycle. We can always publish a memo with a change in between cycles. It doesn't have to wait for the full rebargaining of the agreement with all the compensation. This is something, and Nathan can talk more about his conversations with his stewards.
So currently, we do get some resistance about reporting after hours. If there's a large emergency, we absolutely do it. If there's a large fire, if we've got to go out and condemn, but they're not required. So Ms. Robinson, who is the manager of that division, has to go calling people, seeing if they're willing to come out. Sometimes that can cause some delays. I did want to make this suggestion and also create the caveat that if it does come to DHCA, it also does have to come with the staffing. Our licensing staff, our inspection staff, our small amount of IT staff are already working at capacity. So if we do shift the responsibility from HHS to DHCA, we could be left in that same quandary of not enforcing because we simply don't have the staff and the capacity to do that. The other comment that I was making earlier about increased collaboration with the police has to deal with there's no way for them right now when they dispatch their officers to an incident to determine that that house is an Airbnb or a short-term rental. So, they are already going and they're responding to those complaints on those persistent issues now, but there's just no correlation from that complaint to HHS or DHCA. So, if there's a way to create a process where there's a notification when they're already going out anyway, that we get notifications of that they've been there and that they did actually observe something that would be a violation or a citable offense, that could also help streamline the process because then we wouldn't have to send staff out. We would just be able to facilitate a way to get those reports from the police department.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've got some follow-up questions from Councilmember Jawando, followed by Councilmember Friedson and Councilmember Sales.
Thanks. Just briefly on that point around the staff, and I think you've heard us all say, well, there's resources available either through appropriation or through the fund. It's the fees that are paid through Airbnb themselves, and I think assessing where do those go currently? Let me ask that. Does that just go in the general fund?
Yes, currently they're in the general fund.
So you could theoretically put it towards funding the executive. Yeah, the executive. No, I'm not saying you. I know I don't want to get you in trouble, but the county executive could do that. So I think something to think about. We all love more money in the general fund, but when you can connect money coming in to something to enforce that thing, I think that's a good practice. The noise violations, right? So who currently, depending on what time of day, so is there a collective bargain agreement? I'm trying to remember because I've been on some of these visits. I remember non-police staff going and taking noise readings after hours. Who does that? And is that collectively bargained already?
I believe if they're
is that
certain decibels and after hours, it's EPA that does that.
Right.
Not,
So you might talk to them.
DEP.
Yeah, DP. You're here. Yeah, you're here. Someone's here. No one's here. HHS does it? We got this going on.
No. DEP does all the noise ordinances.
Okay. So presumably they have negotiated with their union-based employees the ability to do that, I would assume, because they're the same. So you may be suggestion to talk to them about how they did that and what the agreements are, because I know there's a precedent in county government for merit-based representative employees to go out after hours and do a similar type function, right? So, and then on just the last thing I had was on the cost. What did I see $500,000 somewhere was mentioned as And where did that number come from? Ms. Nadeau or whoever?
So looking at the fiscal impact statement, it was $542,700,000 beginning in fiscal year 25 and each year thereafter. Sorry, this is at the top of page 4. That's for the 5 new personnel and then also 2 vehicles and then the IT upgrades for a system to track all of this. And then another thing noted in that impact statement is you're not going to offset it with costs in HHS because, you know, we have Kenny's the one handling it all right now, and we'll go back to his other duties. So you're not going to reduce costs in HHS. You're just going to add costs.
Yeah, it's a new cost. Yeah. And so, one, we don't have a full handle on the number of complaints, right? We've said that earlier. So the question is that number? That's just a ballpark number based on what?
It's based off of MC311 for the inquiries.
How many calls come in currently?
Correct, and we estimate about a third of those are complaints.
Okay.
Roughly 2 to 3 complaints a week.
All right. Well, again, I think, you know, we talked about the money coming in as a potential source. We talked about doing current law, checking on the bargaining. There's a lot of things out there that I think there's a lot of work on the executive side of the street that I think can be done without changing the law right now. And I'll just reiterate, I think that's the direction we should go. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Council Member Friedson, followed by Council Vice President Friedson, followed by Council Member Sales.
I accept all titles that are allowed in family settings like this one, so thank you. So I appreciate that. Just a couple of follow-ups. Number one, we don't need a law to coordinate between executive agencies. So that clearly is not happening as well as it should, but there's really no reason why HHS or DHCA couldn't have information sharing with the police department so that they would know going into it to provide them with more information that this is, you know, a facility that is licensed for a certain activity. You know, most officers that I speak to, more information is better going into a scenario. It's safer for them to know what they're getting into, and I think it's safer for, you know, the residents as well for a lot of different reasons. You know, you can only train on and act on what you know, and you know, so I would encourage you to do what you're talking about, but we don't need to help you with that, as far as I can tell, unless there's money that is required to come up with some type of database. It seems to me that that's something the executive branch can and should do. So I appreciate you raising that. I'll just note on the license money, I have raised this before. I raised this during the budget. DHCA licenses like this should be like DPS licenses, and these should be enterprise funds. So this would solve this problem. Councilmember Lukey noted this point, but the amount of money that she is talking about from these nearly 1,500 units will just go into the general fund, and this is the problem. We just then spend it somewhere else. And then the resident expectations that get set that we actually are going to follow through on the things we say we're going to do, which we've proven today that we have not for 7 years, we don't have the resources to do it because we've spent them elsewhere. So the way to solve that is to create enterprise funds for all of these activities, and I will call on the executive branch here again publicly. In the next year's budget, I think that is what you should propose. It would be much better for each of you who are asked to do these impossible tasks with literally no resources and no funding, and it would get us out of the sheepishness, that I understand that managers and directors have about asking for new positions in enforcement when there are other executive priorities that may take precedence. You don't have to be sheepish about the better job you do in enforcing and getting the license fees, the more you get, and you get more resources, the better off you're doing. And you know, I just think it's a much better model, and it's part of the thing that's broken here. And it's not the manager's fault, and it's not the hardworking staff's fault, and we have not created a regime and a system that actually provides resources to deploy in an appropriate way. This 7 years ago was not set up that way, and we have every other example, and we had this conversation in the PHP committee, similarly on every housing inspection related issue. People desperately want us to enforce the rules that we've got, and we are not doing that anywhere near the level at which we should. And I think that starts with directing the license fees to these purposes, which I think is fair for the businesses too. Because if you're raising a license fee on somebody, it's not just to generate general resources, it's to do the activities to keep them safe and to make sure that they're playing on a level playing field, because it's not just to protect consumers, which of course it is, it's to protect businesses who are doing the right thing and following the rules, and they shouldn't be undercut by people who aren't following the rules and doing the right thing and are taking shortcuts, which is not fair for the overwhelming majority of businesses who are doing everything that we've asked of them and are getting cheated because we're not doing our job. So I just wanted to point that out. Has there been any conversations currently in HHS about evening time bargaining on these issues?
No, it's been strictly volunteer. We've had a great core group of 2 to 3 people who have volunteered to do so, and will continue to volunteer to do so as long as HHS has it.
So how does that work currently? Like, is there like a list of, when I leave the office today, if I don't have plans, I put my name on a list and you can call me on my cell phone, and I'll leave dinner and hop in my personal vehicle and stop by a house on, like, I mean, this idea of like volunteering to do formal enforcement for county government is a bizarre system, it seems. So help me understand what we're talking about here.
So in licensure and regulatory, we inquire with our staff who is willing to go out after hours. And
on a daily basis, is it like generally, are you an hour?
Generally. So we have a core group that volunteer, and we have to go through a call list. Basically, as a call comes in on a complaint, we'll go through that call list based on seniority of who volunteered.
So that's like a time and a half. If I want to, it's like, do you want to sign up for opportunities for overtime?
Correct.
And then you get put on the opportunities for overtime list, and then the call comes in. Who answers the phone when the call comes in?
Currently me.
What are your hours?
24/7.
Yeah. So you are literally taking this phone call, and then you are going through this, which sounds like soccer practice is canceled because of weather. I mean, this is how this was this Cracker Jack system where the parents, you had the parents' number and 6 parents signed up to be phone tree captains, and then they went through and called, and then you confirmed that you hit everybody. Now it's Team Snap. But is that really how it works?
That's correct.
So what is the chances that by the time you reach a live body employee who is willing on a minute's notice to find childcare and leave dinner or leave the dinner, turn the stove off and run out and do this and get overtime, which is only like for an hour potentially, what's the chances that when they're showing up, it's the activity's still even happening, or that you actually get somebody to say yes?
That's difficult to answer because a lot of time you can't get a hold of anybody. But when you do get a hold of individuals, you might have 2 or 3 that may want to respond to that. As long as it's not too late at night, we do have a good group that will respond.
All right. Well, I've just got to say, that's an insane, completely ridiculous system. It's not your fault, but the idea for 7 years we haven't had that collective bargaining conversation between the executive branch and the labor partners is ridiculous. And the idea that we have a bill before us to make all these changes when we haven't fixed some of those core problems seems frustrating. And I could imagine as a manager who is working 24/7 that has got to be pretty tough.
Nothing that you said I would agree with at all. And for the one property, and thank you, Council President Glass, for reaching out to Airbnb. We have 6 citations in on that property, and we're waiting on the courts. So there is not just the enforcement issue, getting someone out there. Clearly, we are able to respond and issue citations. We're unable to then take action to revoke a license because we can't get those 3 complaints verified through the courts in 1 year. So if we come out of this with any other thing other than moving to DHCA, we seriously need to consider how do we close the loop so that our inspectors, even once they're fully staffed, can take action quickly to satisfy our residents' concerns.
Okay, fair point. Fine with that. So the last piece of this is the 5 personnel starts in FY25. So is the idea that DHCA will take a few months to figure out what this is going to look like, and enforcement would actually start on July 1st, and the executive is planning to put in, if this switch at least is approved, a $542,000, $700, give or take, appropriation request?
For the remaining time in FY24 if it comes now, and then at the full rate in FY25.
With what money? I'm just curious. Is the intention of the executive branch to send over a supplement? Because that's not what it says here. So I want to, that would be a change, but if that's what's changed, we should be aware before we move forward with the bill.
No, I just clarify what Nathan just described. What he meant is the FY25, if this is shipped to DHCA, the annualized cost for FY25, it would be whatever this here. But if any action that require department to be implemented in FY24, yes, we would. It depends on how the law is being passed ultimately, and then we will follow up with the supplemental request. But right now, we don't know how the law is going and how what kind of responsibility are coming to our department. So at that point, once the decision has been made, finalized, and then we will come back, with the supplemental request.
Okay, and I imagine it's going to take you a little bit of time just to recruit people and do it. So thinking about if you even need to, I understand you can't hire somebody for a job that you don't have budgeted, but thinking through whether you need to even budget it with real money, you might need to be able to supplemental budget it with a nominal amount of money just to give you the authority to recruit, but those positions might not start till July 1st. But if you have to wait till July 1st, then they're not going to start until August, September, well into the fall. So just something to think about. But that's helpful to understand of what your thought process is at the time. I really think we should be focusing on this. I think we're hearing it loud and clear from colleagues. We've got to get enforcement right. I think some of this might have been a legislative issue. I think most of this has been a leadership, operational issue. This has just not been an area that has been focused on. There was a global pandemic in the middle. I understand HHS was dealing with other things, might be a reason why moving it out of HHS makes sense. But clearly for 7 years, this has not been focused on or handled. These issues have not been addressed. And so if moving it helps us to address that and get the resources that are needed to actually do the work, I think that makes sense. I'll get back.
Thank you very much. I just want to double tap on the enterprise concept. A third of the Recreation Department's budget is made up in enterprise. The community use for public facilities, almost entire budget is made up in enterprise. So there's a lot of precedence within county government currently, and that would help offset some of the costs, but also put the department in a much better position than it is now, because we have a structural deficit here pretty clearly. I've got Councilmember Sales followed by Council President Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree that this enforcement should move to DHCA. It seems very appropriate, so I'm glad we are all in agreement about that. Just thinking more about the fiscal impact, I know that this is a service that we have taken on to provide given the new rental market and trying to encourage people to utilize all the opportunities available to get some more resources in their pocket. But it looks like the revenue for, if we were to pass this bill, it states that in FY25, this bill will increase revenue by at least $218,000, but would cost an estimated $542,000. And so I'm just wondering, could two people really manage this role, given the estimated costs? Two people, and you said there were how many nightly calls for code enforcement? I mean, I know that there are over 1,000 tickets that haven't been responded to, but like, what is the average weekly, nightly call for complaints related to short-term rental housing?
The average for coming to me would only be basically in the summertime, and
Okay.
it may be one or two every other weekend. I'm not sure how many police get.
And are there, I don't know, any specialized trainings involved for the staff that would be carrying this out? Or when people volunteer, what's their training on responding to these complaints? Like, is there a set of, I mean, I know that police are called, but what is the training involved in the people who are volunteering for these calls to respond and go to people's homes?
So our staff are always trained to take safety first.
Mm-hmm.
They will arrive on site, assess the situation. If necessary, they'll call the non-emergency number, stay out of harm's way, wait for police to arrive and assist. So the training basically they understand the regulations and what they are looking at, what to enforce, just like any other code enforcement that we do, whether it's restaurants, pools, etc. They're to understand the regulations, what they're assessing, assess the situation, and then stay out of harm's way.
So, I mean, I know that there's different code enforcement for building permits and the people who assess our buildings and look at structural issues, but is there specialized training that's needed for these code enforcers that two would be enough?
You would have to ask DHCA. I think two would be acceptable, provided that majority of it is normal working hours, going out and doing inspections for licensing after hours, every other weekend, maybe have somebody on call, but that would be up to them.
I can say that the fiscal impact statement and the estimate for staffing that we wrote into it was for the bill as written,
Okay.
with the labor constraints that we currently have. And so the bill as written has us doing complaint-based inspections as compared to licensing inspections. And so if the goal was for DHCA to take over nighttime response and licensing inspections in order to get the license, then it would require more than 2 staff members.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what the next steps are following this meeting, if we are going to hold off on this piece of legislation, reevaluate the current enforcement underway and see what that looks like in next budget season, not following this particular piece of, not following this bill that was introduced by the county executive, but reassessing what enforcement would look like and what licensing enforcement would look like. I don't know if we're going to do that, and you'll come back and we compare the costs and benefits associated with what your office is proposing. So,
Gotcha, ma'am.
yes.
Okay, perfect. So you teed it up perfectly, and then Council President Glass is actually in the queue, but just quickly. So I think where we're heading is voting to shift this over to DHCA, or at least, but there still have to be some items that we discuss within the proposed legislation to be able to put them in the best position to have that succeed from day one. So, and that will be stripped out of the line items relative to the additional constraints on the enforcement side. So that's, I think, where we're headed. I don't think we're taking up the ZTA, but we still definitely want to hear from the planning board before we leave today, because they've been discussing this issue too, and their perspective is important as well. But I think that's where we're probably going to land for today anyways. But I'll yield to Council President Glass.
Great. I think that's a smart plan. And clearly folks are listening to the conversation because it's been conveyed to me that the call that I made to Airbnb clearly was a sign that I had some information worthy of their consideration, and that they are in fact opening an investigation. It does not state how that investigation will go, right? And that investigation does require some code enforcement report or some violations, right? And clearly that's what we're talking about here. I would like to ask Commander McBain to join us, because missing from the conversation is what happens if your neighbor or your neighbor's house is in the midst of a party at 2 a.m. that spills outside, that stays indoors, but you can hear three doors down. Commander McBain, can you share with us what you and your team do?
Yes, sir. So I think it was actually said by somebody up here on council, but we look at it as just a party call or a disorderly house. We have no information that it's a Airbnb or a rental or a owned house. And so we respond and we do either a controlled dispersal of the party. We try to find an owner or representative that has, ownership of the house in some capacity. And then we initially make requests to end the party or quiet it or go inside. And then we clear the call. What happens though is if we continually get these calls throughout the night, at some point we will make a decision to issue citations for either a disorderly house, a disorderly conduct call, or other criminal violations, maybe if there's alcohol involved or things like that. So, that's really how we deal with all these party calls or these disorderly house calls.
Sure, and I was young once, right? And so once, long time ago. I understand the nature of a party, right? Regardless of home ownership or rental. And so if something happens, law enforcement will show up, say, come on kids, quiet down, right? But if it persists, it then rises to some threshold that you would record and would be part of a public record.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
And so I think that's important because if there are problem properties, there'd be a track record of those problems.
Yes.
And again, we're not talking about one-offs. We're talking about persistent problems.
Yeah, yes, sir. In preparation for today, I tracked three addresses. I don't have to say what they were, which ones, but I can do a CAD history lookup to see how many times we've responded to any particular address, typically for whatever calls for service. So usually, if it's a disorderly call, we'll see multiple calls for service at some of these problem houses that we're talking about today.
And would DHHS or most likely in the future DHCA be able to contact you, contact MCPD, access that information, and then pass it on to whatever platform would require it for their own purposes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Before we get to what do you think, Mr. Dude? Do we think we should hear from the planning board before we try to consolidate the DHCA vote while these folks are up here? Or do you think it'd be better to hear from the planning board?
Well, they did drive all the way from Wheaton. So.
All right. Gotcha. That's right.
For the record, Jason Sartori, Chief of Countywide Planning Policy at the Planning Department. Chair Albornoz, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this, what's been a really interesting and thought-provoking conversation so far. Keep it really simple. The board generally supported the bill and the movement of enforcement to DHCA, but did take issue with some of the policy recommendations in the bill, and those are all the same ones that are reflected in the ZTA, and so the board did not approve or recommend approval of the ZTA. they were really questioning whether it would provide meaningful enforcement or if it would just reduce flexibility for the lessors and the travelers who are looking to use these residences. So we're more than happy to, if we get into conversations about the specific elements of those policy recommendations, to contribute to that. But at this point, that was all we had to contribute.
Thank you. Good thing you don't get paid by the minute. So that was great. No, that was really, that was a helpful summary. All right, Ms. Nadeau, if you could do your best then, just on the DHCA issue, consolidating the components of the packet that are related to that so that we can discuss those one by one. And then we'll put a pin in the rest of the conversation for now.
Okay. So high level, I think the things it sounds like we're going to go through are, starting on page 9, jurisdiction, approval of licenses, revocation and suspension of licenses, and then the Board of Appeals piece. So starting at the top of page 9, 1 is jurisdiction. This is moving it to DHCA. Sounds like everybody agrees, so that's the first decision point.
So without objection, colleagues? Yep. All right.
Now, if you jump to the middle of page 12, this is also a change in the bill. So this will basically increase the director's authority to approve, deny, renew, or reinstate a license. So what this is going to do is, right now it basically says you get this self-certification from the applicant, and then you approve it. This will say that the director has a little more time to look at that application, that they can request an inspection if they'd like, because right now there is no provision to do an inspection, and that they can have the applicant show cause if they do decide to suspend or revoke. So this will just give our DHCA director a bit more authority in enforcement.
If you could just quickly go through what the decision-making tree would be on that, because obviously you're not going to be the one reviewing the technical aspects of each of these, but who would report that recommendation to you?
That would be, I guess, the new staff who would be in, that would be licensing, who would report that to us. Licensing would have a couple of new staff to help them with that, and they would report that to me. And then if the language stays as may, then I would use my discretion to decide which properties to request code to go to, unless you all wish us to require an inspection for all properties.
Sorry, one thing I did want to note here, council staff fully agrees the ability to do an inspection is very important, and obviously there's fiscal impacts if we require it. The only thing I would flag is, and I don't think this has to rise to the level of a regulation or anything, but just something on the DHCA website that says, we may ask for an inspection, and if we ask for one, here's what it will entail, so people at least know like what it is the inspector is looking for.
Absolutely. We need to develop policies for that because we don't want to be arbitrary and capricious in exercising this authority.
Got it. Would that be required in the legislation, Ms. Nadeau? Or
That's not
just an
something I
operational
recommended
issue?
in the legislation,
Okay.
just a FYI might help.
Got it. Yes.
Oh, I was just going to mention that, for accessory dwelling units or ADUs, we do pre-inspect prior to the issuance of a license for ADUs. Our thought process is that we would handle this the same way, just to ensure the safety of people who are guests and residents and renters, or take part in this, that we would do pre-inspections prior to licensing. And then, of course, we would also hypothetically or possibly get increased complaint calls, not because of noise violations or disturbances, but because of existing code violations that a renter may find in the house, and we would have to go out to do re-inspections for those types of items.
Gotcha.
So I will say that it sounds as if, and tell me if I'm wrong, if the desire of the council is for us to license up those 1,400 properties, and if we are to license them up, then two inspectors are not going to be adequate, because I'm guessing you don't want to give us, how many years do you want us to give us to do that? And so, because we're talking about licensing a complaint. So if we have more than a year to get to try to get through this, that's fine. It just depends on how rapidly you want us to get them all under licensure. And if we, go with what we think is appropriate and have to inspect them before licensure, then that complicates the process. I'm just trying to be really upfront about what we're thinking.
Could there be a virtual, because they're inspecting the number of bedrooms, what are they inspecting? What are they looking at? Smoke detectors?
Yeah, typically we inspect for the existence of any existing code violations prior to the issuance of a license, like we would do for ADUs.
Okay.
And that would include your carbon monoxide detectors, your smoke detectors, egress, all of those other things.
Okay. I've got Councilmember Lukey is in the queue, and then I'm going to go to Council Vice President Friedson.
Yeah, so thank you, Director Bruton, for saying the magic words arbitrary and capricious. I appreciated that. But, and that was for when they may be conducted. But my question is, you talked about denying or revoking. What can you, I think it would be helpful that there needs to be an articulation of the things that may get you dinged on getting approved in the first place, so that the public is aware and that they're able to make corrective changes as this is rolling out and we're about to do this, so that they know what's expected in whatever pre-licensure inspection takes place, if that is something that everybody says we should do, or that may be a reason or cause for you having your license revoked. Is that doable?
Yes, I think it would benefit the consumer as well as the quasi-business owner in an Airbnb to have clarity on exactly what the lines are. I don't, again, arbitrary and capricious, we do not want to be.
Right. And, just thinking this through in terms of how things on Airbnb or VRBO are listed, since this would be a unique local law and how that works, like that you might want to, put language that folks could include in their listing about their licensure, so that, again, consumers who are trying to rent have that assurance that they have a license, or that there's a mechanism for people to check that the property is registered.
Yeah, and I should say that, Nathan and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, that for initial inspection, we would be looking for compliance with the housing code. Because anybody living or residing in an Airbnb would want to have the same basic health and safety restrictions.
Right.
And so that already gets to what we'd be looking for licensure.
Right.
And then as far as complaint-based and removal of a license, we would want to have it would be either you'd stop meeting the code and you don't remedy that, or it would be certain behaviors related to some of the complaints we've been talking about, or other things like that that we would list as red lines, and we should have sort of a progressive discipline kind of thing. You're not out on the first strike, as Councilmember Jawando mentioned, as sometimes it's a matter of ignorance, or you don't know what people who are staying are doing. You need a pattern, but we don't want to give too much leash in developing a pattern that has a negative impact on the community surrounding.
Right, yeah, because there's a big difference between one consumer who's rented a property where there's a call for the party house, and one where the cat is flagged with all kinds of stuff in it. That's a different situation, and that owner is going to be aware because it's a repeated pattern as opposed to a one-off. The owner may not be present on the premises, and as I understand it, they are not required to be present on the premises for these rentals, correct?
As far to the best of my knowledge, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Friedson.
Thank you. How many complaints have been received up to this point, specifically related to fire code violations or other safety hazards by consumers, by people who are renting a facility, a property, and felt like their safety was at risk?
I don't know the exact number. It's maybe 10, and we refer those to DHCA to look at under their housing code.
Okay, 10 out of 1,400. So what was the nature of those concerns? Because there's a wide range of a potential safety issue. Was the fire alarm not connected? Was there no fire alarm at all? Was it just uninhabitable?
Unhabitable and means of egress.
Means of egress.
Correct.
Okay, and what happened in those cases? Did the people stay overnight, or they didn't stay there, but they wanted their money back, or they wanted it to be shut down so another consumer didn't get put in the same position that they did?
I believe that they stayed there overnight, and none of them approached us for their money back.
Well, I assume they wouldn't approach you for the money back. I assume they would approach Airbnb or Verbo. Or
We didn't. They did not divulge that information to us. They just reported.
Got it. So we're not sure what happened with the transaction. You know, there's a third party generally that there are terms and conditions. So I just want to be clear here. 10 out of 1,400 is not a big number. So I have a real concern of us moving in the direction where we're going to do pre-inspections, which would essentially be a dramatic shift from not enforcing anything at all, including significant complaints, to almost shutting down Airbnbs through the back door. I mean, that's literally where we are going here. My preference, just to put it out there, would be to just get what we have right now and get it right. And then if you know, we need to take more significantly draconian actions, then we can look at that later. But I would not be interested in a pre-inspection regime where you get shut down unless we get 2 inspectors to show up to one of the 1,400 properties, which literally means that we will no longer have this thing that happens everywhere. And my concern would be nobody's going to call us. They're going to do it black market style. And rather than bringing people into the regulatory regime, we're going to convince people not to go through the regulatory regime. It's going to get more expensive and more difficult for us to actually do the inspections and the regulations and licensing. So, and then the comparison to ADUs, we had some issues with ADU inspections and how that was set up, and it actually stopped some ADUs from happening, and we've tried to work through some of those issues with the department, which I appreciate, but literally the interpretation from the department to start was that in order to get an ADU that you hadn't yet built, the Department of Housing and Community Affairs had to come and inspect the property before the structure was there. So literally a housing department that is responsible for the safety of structures was going to inspect an area that didn't currently have a structure. So I mean, it's no one's fault. You were doing what you were told you had to do, which was to do a pre-inspection, but it made absolutely no sense. It was a ridiculous dynamic. So I think we need to be really, really careful of this going off the rails and going from 7 years of no enforcement whatsoever to we're going to basically shut this down by trying to swing the pendulum entirely in the other direction. I have no interest in doing that. My much bigger interest here is to say there are problems that are happening. My understanding based on the anecdotal evidence of what we received in conversations is that the overwhelming number of complaints are not based on the safety and habitability. They're based on neighbors complaining about the use of the property. It's noisy, there's a party, all the things that we've been talking about up to this point. And as of right now, we have not done anything to address those issues besides sending our police department that is stretched way too thin to shut down whatever that activity is, or to, you know, basically provide some level of deterrence for it to be mitigated. So I think we should have a complaint-driven process. We should have an ability to do licensing. We should have the licensing pay for the inspectors through an enterprise fund, and I think that should be the direction that DHCA more broadly moves into, as I have said otherwise, because I just think that's going to be an important area. But I want to be really careful of us swinging this pendulum really far into the other direction, because this was not presented originally as a shutdown short-term rental bill. This was we're not regulating this well, we want to shift it to another department and add in a few tools to try to do a better job, and that would be a major, major difference in what we're talking about. Thanks.
Council Vice President, thank you for those comments. So our thinking when we talked about this, first of all, the bill has the word may. So the executive is not imagining that we're going to go out and do mass inspections. Our concern in our own internal work group was the original bill the original law allowed for self-attestation, and the discussion in our circles was say we license a property and then something happens, and we had we required things, and we didn't have a follow-through mechanism to make sure that even if randomly, even if may, we were doing. So yes, must may be way too strong. We're at may, but we definitely don't want to leave out there that we won't be inspected.
Yeah, just to be very clear, I am fine with the bill as it is written, that the discretion at the director and manager level to inspect as needed on a complaint-driven, like we do in most other instances. We're a complaint-driven enterprise. Where I'm uncomfortable with is what the conversation started heading towards, which was doing a pre-inspection, which would require hundreds of people to do, or would effectively de facto shut down all Airbnb, Vrbo, and other short-term rentals, which I don't think was the intention. And so I was just trying to be careful of shifting this too far in one direction where we get a little overzealous with the fact that we haven't done any enforcement and we go to doing over-enforcement to the point of shutting down an industry.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. On the inspection point, I know DC had I think it was Kenya McDuffie, had a bill a few years ago to inspect all Airbnbs. Didn't pass. They don't inspect them. But there was a discussion. I remember tracking it.
No, but there's.
I do think, but they, it was in the context of licensing them, right? And so there is some expectation from the public, if they are licensed, that there is some habitability requirement. I think that's a fair expectation. The self-certification has its flaws. We've all heard the horror stories. Maybe we've experienced it ourselves. The very unique picture angles, or the whatever, and you get there, and reviews are a market-based check on that, right? I do think that there might be a middle ground where you can, upon, without hiring a whole army of new staff, and over time, when new people are entering, or as you do your annual review, and it still would take a while, without shutting anything down, like it's not like you need this to be open, but that we could set us on a path to having a check. I think that might be a middle ground, and I do think I'd want to hear from you all if that's possible, because I do think there's something. It's not just that we've been talking mostly about the noise and complaints from neighbors, but there is a public safety component of this for people who are coming in and expecting to have habitable Airbnbs.
Yeah, I think,
or whatever, short-term rentals.
Tell me all if I'm getting this wrong. What the impression I'm getting is that we want to move to the way the bill says to May, in that we will inspect on a complaint-based basis, or if we notice something that we're concerned about of a property that's trying to license, if we have cause to do that, and that our focus will be on complaint-based issues plus getting all of them to license, getting all of the unlicensed to license. And so I think the bill as written, that we can do that. The IT specialist and the two new licensing folks can work collaboratively together with the existing staff to track these folks down, to make sure, because it's a very fluid market. Things go in and go out. And so we'll need to work with the software that we already pay for, if the county already has a contract for, to do that. And then as we evolve over time, and as you see the results of getting more folks and getting more Airbnbs and Verbos, and et cetera, inspected, the executive branch and the council could work together to determine if you want us to shift over time to doing more licensing related inspections. Because I completely agree with what you all are saying. We're not trying to disrupt an industry by doing this. We're trying to just make our enforcement of the existing law more responsible.
That sounds reasonable to me, and so yeah, I think as you described it, under the current bill authority, you'd have the ability to do that and come back to us if you think you want or can do more. Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
And we'll have the data for you all to judge us by.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Sales.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding Council Vice President Friedson's concerns about disrupting the industry by doing the pre-inspections of the unlicensed accommodations. Was it the pre-inspections that?
Yeah, the issue is if you have two people who need to inspect 1,400 properties in order for them to be able to
Get
rent
the
it out,
license. Mhm.
then they're either going to take years to actually be able to start renting them out, or more likely, from my perspective, they will just do it illegally, which is the whole thing that we want to avoid. I mean, I got to be honest, most things that we try to do that we overregulate, we don't stop it from happening. We just make it happen in an unregulated way. It's what happened with ADUs. We didn't really allow ADUs in almost any circumstance. And what did we have? Almost all the ADUs in Montgomery County, until we made a change to slightly liberalize ADUs in many instances, were happening. They were just happening illegally, which makes them inherently less safe, and it means they get done cheaper. So it's a cheaper way to provide that, but it provides little resource and opportunity for somebody to file a complaint. So that's what I'm concerned about, of us going too far in the other direction. I think that would be a major change here. And I think we should remember this wasn't even in DHCA before, because this was seen as a very different type of activity. Like the idea of providing permanent housing to somebody and the obligations that you should have to go through in order to lease something on an annualized basis is a much different standard than on what is generally a nightly basis. It's not to say you have no obligations, it's just to say we shouldn't be creating an equivalency of those two things, because they are quite different in terms of what the options are for the resident, what the vulnerability is for the resident. So that's the nature of the comments and the point that I was making.
Yeah, I think my concern is that we are trying to create an enforcement environment on places that we're not familiar with the accommodations. We don't know what the original accommodations look like outside of what's on the website. And I'm just wondering if people are going to be complaining about things happening within the accommodation and we don't have any history of that accommodation. How much of a challenge is that going to cause with regulating a safe environment for our residents? And I don't know how long it would take to, look at these short-term rentals. But even if I'm in an establishment for one night, I'm spending my money. I want to make sure that it's safe and it's, free of any carbon monoxide or an unsafe exit way. I mean, I don't know how long this would take to review these accommodations, but I mean, we haven't done anything. And so if we're going to do this and do it right, we should have a standard for how we're evaluating these short-term accommodations if we're going to start enforcing what they should look like and how people should, be using them while they're there, what sort of environment they're in while they're there. So I'm not trying to be overly prescriptive, but I want to make sure that these are habitable accommodations that are safe for residents to be in there. And I don't know what the context is or the specificity of all of the complaints that have been sent into the office. I don't know how those are organized, if there's a certain type, if it's mostly just noise complaints or if it's actual structural concerns that are being expressed. And so not knowing the nature of these complaints, it's kind of hard to understand what's happening with this entire situation that we've stuck ourselves into. And I'm just,
okay.
I'm leaving with more questions than I had before we got into this.
Fair. Councilmember Balcom, and then I'm going to I'm going to attempt to review where we are. So, Councilmember Bell.
Thank you. I just want to confirm that this would not be in the detail of how and when and who is being inspected would not be in the legislation, right? Right now, we're just looking at the word may, and I think that there's general agreement that the word may in the legislation is important. So I think we could move forward on that. In terms of how long it would take, just did a quick calculation. It would take a year to inspect 1,400 if you did 5 a day. And that's all you did is 5 a day. So I think the expectation of doing pre-application is difficult and impossible. But, however, we don't have to decide that today.
You nailed it. That was what I was going to say. So is that correct, Ms. Nadeau?
Yes, so no amendment. The legislation has that piece as introduced. It will say may.
Okay. And is there anything else relative to the transfer over to DHCA that we need to review?
Yes. So hopping over to the next one on page 13, and this might answer some of the questions that have already come up. For revocation or suspension of license, similarly, this will give, instead of using the 3 verified complaints that can't get through the court system, the director will have a list of reasons for why a license can be revoked or suspended. That includes violation of this chapter or any county code, operating in a manner disruptive to peaceful enjoyment of the community, a manner dangerous to health and safety, a manner that's a nuisance, or being convicted of any provisions under the criminal laws under the state. I did note here the language is pretty broad. It's going to give quite a bit of discretion, but these are the same standards we use for hotels, so it's not a brand new idea. That is language that exists. And then also part of that, if you're guilty of violating in the last 12 months, that's going to change to 36 months. So it's a wider window for how those licenses can be revoked. Lastly, and I'm sorry that this is in a footnote. So the way that I read this is that if you are currently operating illegally and get caught, now you have to wait 3 years to get a license, which I don't think is what we want. I think we want them to come into compliance immediately. So my suggestion would be an amendment to make clear that if the violation is just you've been operating illegally and with inspections and DHCA feels like you can get a license, we just want you to get a license, that you wouldn't have to wait that 36 months.
I agree with that, and in a moment I'll ask somebody to move Ms. Nadeau's recommendation for that amendment, but in the meantime, I've got Council President Glass followed by Council Vice President Friedson.
Well, I'll move that now, and hearing agreement. This is what I wanted to just kind of touch on a little bit. I think it was referred to by someone earlier, but the punitive nature that we're talking about, can we talk it through a little bit more? It seems to be my interpretation that 1 strike and you're out, and that penalty time is 36 months. Is that right?
That is how it reads, yeah.
Okay. And can you elaborate a little bit more about what those strikes are? Because, we're trying to figure this out, and, my concern is that a homeowner who has let somebody, rent their place for a short term. They might be a bad actor and might be staying one night, and there goes 36 months because of one night, right? And so what I'm hearing from you and hearing from colleagues is we want to encourage good behavior without being too punitive, and so work this through with me.
Sure, love to. So I will say the 3 in the list of bullets on page 13 that raised a bit of red flag for me were the disruptive to general peaceful enjoyment of the community, manner dangerous to health and safety of the community, and operating in a manner that's a nuisance because of noise or other activity. Those are the 3 that are just, in terms of legal writing, a bit subjective. Because it's who decides what general peaceful enjoyment is. Is it one neighbor who just hates you complained? So you could hypothetically strike just those 3, and it would still be a violation if you violated any of our written rules in this chapter or any criminal law. That would still be enough reason to revoke that license if you felt that this was too broad.
And so just thinking through the processes a little bit more, if whether it is law enforcement or DHCA were to recognize improper behavior by those who are the renter, the leasee, right? That information would then get conveyed to the property owner, the license holder. Again, just trying to, because what we want to make sure is that ultimately the license holder is aware of the actions of what's happening in their home, so that I'm inclined to extend that one strike to something else, and I'm open to whatever that might be. But clearly, they need to know that they need to be more discerning into who is staying at their place.
So I think if I'm reading your mind appropriately here, that a complaint would come in and DHCA would let the license holder and property owner know, we received this complaint, your license is now in trouble. And so that could be a process that the agency sets up internally, or we can write that directly in the law that maybe they get a warning and then it gets revoked. One thing I will note here is that, and this kind of comes up later, is license holders can appeal a suspension or revocation. So if they do feel I was unfairly targeted, it was one party, I didn't know, they could appeal that, and it would go to the director and then goes to Board of Appeals.
Okay.
So there is a little bit of wiggle room if somebody really feels like it was unjust.
Yeah, so that's clearly the direction. I'm open to how far we go, but I think we need to be a little more accommodating and encourage good behavior when we can.
Council Vice President Friedson.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say something similarly, so I'll double tap that or second it if it was a formal motion. Yeah, the must thing is the challenge here, right? So to have something that must be and then have something that is so objective or subjective, excuse me, I think puts the director in a nearly impossible position where the expectations of the community are you must do this because we think it is disruptive to our general peaceful enjoyment of our community. And the director has a different view of that, and who, you know, that I think creates a very difficult scenario, whereas providing discretion where that judgment call can get made, I think would be much more appropriate. And since I like Director Bruton so much, I don't want to put him in that tough position.
So I will note the bill currently says may suspend or revoke. So it does say may right now.
Oh, okay, it was the packet I think that said
Did the packet say must? It should have said
yeah.
may.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so may. All right, so I still think moving those 3 into a different category makes sense personally. So if I will second what I think was Council President Glass's suggestion. If
Yeah, we've got a second.
Okay, all right. Well, then I agree with that, and I'll yield back.
Councilmember Lukey.
I just want to clarify, because you had proposed some amendment language that was different from the 5 bullet points we're currently discussing. And as I understood it, Councilmember Glass's motion to approve was on the amendment language that you had proposed, and I seconded that. But then we're having another discussion about the squishy subjective language of the 3 middle bullets that are on this page, which will need an additional motion, which I am happy to make.
Okay, so to hold that.
Yeah, we got to deal with the first one.
President Glass is coming back right
Yes.
now, and we will call that particular vote to order. So we have a motion on the table to move Ms. Nadeau's suggested amendment made by Council President Glass, seconded by Councilmember Lutke. Could you just articulate one last time, Ms. Nadeau, the suggested amendment?
Yes, so this first one is to add language, which I will draft and then send to the whole committee, that operating without a license is not the kind of strike that would mean you have to wait 36 months.
Right.
Okay. Any questions, colleagues? All those in favor, please raise your hands. All right, that's unanimous among all 3 committees. And then, Councilmember Lutke,
Yeah.
if you'd like to move this next part.
Yeah, just quick question before I make a formal motion on the subjective language. You note in the packet that the same language exists for suspension or revocation of a hotel license. In the hotel scenario, how many complaints does it take before their license is revoked?
I will defer to HHS because that's where that lives currently while I quickly scan the bill because I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'm just, I understand the language has parity with the hotel context, but again, I think that a one strike and you're out, particularly on squishy language like that, doesn't work. That's something that's ripe for abuse by others who might be targeting someone who is renting their house out, and we don't need to get involved in that business, and I don't want to enable that type of conduct. So,
so what I can say is for hotels, it does also say may and not must. So,
okay, so but under our current law, it does say a license must be suspended. That's what's above the bullet points. And I don't know if that was the point that Councilmember Friedson was trying to ask about may versus must.
Okay, so I'm reading my sentence, which was under current law, it must be suspended if 3 verified complaints. The bill is recommending allowing the director to suspend or revoke for the bullet pointed reasons.
I would like to move that we can only, that it's discretionary for the director to suspend on bullets 1 and 5 and eliminate the subjective ones.
Is there a second? Seconded by Council Vice President Friedson. Yes, Director.
I need to ask a clarifying question because I don't have the bill memorized. If those 4 behavior-related issues are taken out, are there other existing ways that we could revoke a license for the types, like with the 3 properties we were talking about earlier, for persistent bad behavior across multiple different renters?
Right.
Is there still a mechanism that we could revoke a license for persistent bad behavior?
So I think that's at the core of why I'm making the motion, and perhaps we need secondary language that if you take the 3 more subjective things and there are multiple incidents, because the issue is one incident, if it's a violation of Chapter 54 or a conviction of the criminal law, there's already been a judicial decision on the issue, right? These 3 in the middle are where it gets hairy and where that's more problematic. So having that and a 1 strike and it being totally discretionary, which can in and of itself reduce public confidence in the process, we don't really need to do that. So if you take those other 3 and move them into a separate category, which allows after a pattern of behavior, the director may. So that could be a separate motion, but we have one pending now.
Absolutely agree with that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we have a motion and a second on the floor. Ms. Nadeau, could you summarize really quickly once again?
Yes, so this second motion is to remove the 3 bullet points 2, 3, and 4, which were the more quote-unquote subjective abilities to revoke or suspend a license.
Colleagues, all those in favor, please raise your hands. That is unanimous. And Council Vice President
the other one?
Friedson.
Oh, wait.
Oh, sorry.
Or the second motion I wanted to make was to allow the discretion for the director to revoke a license based on a pattern of violations of those 3 bullet points that we just removed.
Friendly amendment? Can we make it the 2? I mean, the general peaceful enjoyment of the community, we
can get rid of that.
I have real concerns of what that means and how that would be interpreted. I think sticking to health and safety of the community and noise or other activity,
right.
I mean, that's wide latitude for the director with discretion to decide.
Bullets 3 and 4
would be
Chair Friedson?
It would be adding a pattern of, a pattern of violation or a pattern of behavior related to a manner disruptive to the a manner dangerous to the health and safety of the community, or that is a nuisance because of noise or other activity. So it's nuisance or health and safety, and I'll second that.
Yep. Okay. 3 and 4. Okay.
Sorry, I'm processing that in real time here. I agree in principle. I just want to make sure that I'm thinking of different scenarios that may or may not be covered by that. I can't think of one. So I think that sounds reasonable. I agree. All right, all those in
So
favor?
it's removing 3 and 4, the help and keeping
No,
3 and 4
keeping 3 and
only.
4, eliminating
In a separate category
Okay.
for pattern. Yeah.
Gotcha.
General peaceful enjoyment of a community is a very subjective
Yeah.
standard.
Yeah, yeah. All right, all those in favor of that amendment, please raise your hands. All right, that is unanimous as well.
So congratulations, the last one is on the very last page, and it is literally the last recommendation. This is the piece about the Board of Appeals. Originally, they had to have a hearing within 60 days and act within 30 days. It's really inconsistent with the Board of Appeals' usual timelines.
Yeah.
I spoke to Barbara J., their director, and a lot of the thinking here is the Board of Appeals tries their best to do everything quickly, and they have many equally important matters. So just removing that timeline, which will also give members of the public and residents more time to challenge an appeal.
I concur. Without objection. Thank you. I'll just note something, and Council President Glass alluded to this, and I appreciate him and his team following up and addressing this issue. But there are two parties here, right? There's the property owner. There's three. There's the property owner. There are the people who are renting, who may be causing the disruption. And then there's Airbnb or the company. So there are multiple entities that you now have, Director, to be able to approach or address the issue with. And we need to use all three because clearly it's not a one-size-fits-all. There are going to be different circumstances. But this will obviously give you more tools at your disposal. And poor Mr. Welsh will now be able to enjoy his family's picnics and birthday parties without being on call 24/7. We have not yet dealt with, nor can we right now. We're giving you the keys and giving you some latitude, but that doesn't still direct the issue of the capacity. And so, and there are other layers that we're going to have to follow up on operationally, beginning with engagement with our brothers and sisters in labor to make sure that that particular issue is addressed. And then we talk about funding and hopefully through some sort of enterprise mechanism. So I would ask the executive branch to come back to us for our second session with some concrete steps and proposals and ideas to address those outstanding issues, and then also address some of these internal operational issues that are leading to some pretty significant confusion. We're circling back in 2 weeks, and I guess we will take up the other components then, but I'm not sure there's going to be a large appetite to make significant changes, but we need to go through as has been proposed. But at least this, for now, puts us in a better position than we were before this conversation started. Ms. Nadeau?
Two things. I checked with Ms. Tenenbaum, our wonderful clerk, and it might not be 2 weeks.
Okay, no problem.
So checking, scheduling things to see what, joint committees are tough. There's a lot of you here, most of the council, in fact. And so figuring out that scheduling. And then the second piece, I just want to have on the record before we go, the vote on the bill is yes with amendments, and the vote on the ZTA is do not recommend approval, correct?
Correct. Well, okay, Council President Glass?
I support the bill. I think there are things in the ZTA that are worth a conversation. And, you know, I'll make the statement now and let it linger between now and whenever we're able to reconvene. But one of the things that is currently prohibited is essentially agritourism. And I think that as we talk about modernizing this program and allowing short-term rentals, we talk a lot about our agricultural reserve, and we talk a lot about our beautiful rustic roads and our beautiful wineries and breweries, and I think people would like to stay near them for the weekend, for the night. And that can only be accomplished through a ZTA. And so I throw that out there now. I see the time. And it will spark conversation. but I didn't want to gloss over the fact that we didn't want to address the ZTA. And I haven't had a conversation with my colleagues, particularly the district council members from who represent the Ag Reserve, but I think it is an important conversation, so I yield back.
Thank you. I have a point to make after Chair Fanny Gonzalez speaks.
I have a ZTA being prepared on that very topic, totally outside this, and I think we need to keep it outside. And you went ahead of me before talking to my colleague here, Melvin Balcom, but it will be...
Your secret is safe with us.
Yeah, it's not safe anymore, but it will definitely be out before the agritourism session that we have in ECON, but it's coming, so I will ask...
We look forward to that conversation.
Yeah.
So this is a procedural question, Ms. Nadeau, but now that HHS is no longer part of this equation, that's probably one less committee that needs to be coordinated.
You're running away that quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I'm enjoying this conversation.
I've quickly consulted with the other co-chair, and if it's just DHCA, we can take it up in PHP moving forward. I think coming back at the next session to share initial thoughts based on this bill, I think would be helpful if we do already have a session, but I think moving forward, there's going to be a lot of conversation that we need to have in terms of budget implications and otherwise, and we can schedule time to take that up in PHP directly.
So to answer the question from central staff's perspective, we leave which committee up to the chairs and council president, and then of course any council member can attend any committee work session.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's just review one last time what we did today. We are moving the bill forward as amended to reflect that it now is covered by DHCA. We're going to go back to PHP to have a broader conversation to make sure that DHCA is put in the best position to actually be able to enforce the bill, which has budget implications. And we still need to address some of the matters related to the ZTA. We're not going to be doing those right now, but that will be in a follow-up.
Sorry, one final point is, and the chairs and of course council president makes the agenda can decide this. I am understanding this as the bill can move forward to full council, although I guess we know what the vote will be, before PHP has that work session.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Thank you all very much. I think with that, the three committees today are adjourned.
Very good.